Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Using Relationship Intelligence to Accelerate Business Development in Consulting. I'm Michelle Daly, Head of Demand at Affinity, and I'm joined today by Affinity SVP Brian Cloudley, founder of ELP Advisors Sarah Colvin, and the managing partner at ChangeGoat, Lucas Nagel. Before I pass you on to our moderator, Brian, just a few housekeeping notes. We will be recording today's webinar and we'll share that after today's event. You can submit questions during the webinar and we will answer those offline afterwards. You can always reach out to webinars@affinity.co and we will answer any questions you have. And with that, on to Brian.
Welcome to our webinar series. Hi, I'm Brian Cloudley. I look after customer success at Affinity. My team focuses on working with VCs, corporate VCs, investment banks, real estate firms, and also now more and more services firms. So I started my career in consulting. I actually spent 10 years at Accenture, and I'm excited to kind of contrast that with what we hear with our panel today. So let's go straight to the panel with introductions. So first, I want to introduce Sarah Colvin from EPL Advisors. Sarah has a bunch of experience that she brings to bear from working with hedge funds and limited partners. And also she's going to get added to the list of people way more talented than me from an artistic perspective as a professional singer. Your super impressive background, and excited to have you join the panel today, Sarah.
Brian, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. I'm a big supporter of Affinity. I send all of my clients to Affinity. I'll just get that out of the way first and foremost, because I think that everybody should know that after using multiple CRMs, it's just probably heads and tails above the rest of them that I've ever used in the past 15 years. So congratulations on such an exciting system and such a great time in the growth curve of your own company. I'm super excited for you guys and where you're headed. I started EPL Advisors just this year, actually, after spending many years sort of informally consulting with startups and hedge funds and private equity firms that were in their very nascent stages of establishing their businesses. And I sit in this apex of really helping people to understand how to articulate their brand and their brand value, as well as the value of the underlying assets that every one of those company owns to investors. And having spent 15 years working in investor relations and understanding the importance of alignment of interest between investors and the companies with whom they invest, I felt that it was an extraordinarily important skill set that a lot of people lack. And what I found in starting my company was that, the phone rang constantly, and it rings every day now. And people just say, how is it that you can help me articulate my brand to an investor base? We're about to do a capital raise. What do we need to do? How do we set this up? What do we do about all of the aspects of investor relations and communications and coordinating meetings and follow-ups? And how do we do all of those things? And so my company is really geared toward helping people sort of navigate those waters. And it's been really exciting, and Affinity helps me do that in so many ways. And we'll talk about that in a little while.
Thanks, Sarah. That's really great background. I also want to introduce Lucas Nagel. Thank you so much for joining as well. Lucas comes with a lot of background in large services firms providing consulting in Booz Allen, as well as in his own firm, ChangeGoat, where he's a single service provider. Lucas, welcome to the webinar. I really appreciate you spending time with us today. Could you tell us a little bit about your firm as well and how you got into consulting?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. It's also been great to get to know Sarah as well. And it's exciting to see also I can't tell you how excited I am about Affinity actually opening up for consulting. I've looked at plenty of CRMs for clients, and the reason why I'm on this webinar is because I was reaching out for a private equity client of my own, looking at CRMs, hoping that they had changed and had gotten better. And little did I know that they said, actually, hey, have you thought about for your firm? And I said, hey, that's a great idea. And so as I got into it, that's why I'm here as well. So excited, that for some of my clients, this could be great, but it's also for me. So, and what got me on the hook was my consulting firm is relationship driven. And so when I saw that Affinity was claiming to be relationship driven, I had a lot of hope. And that's kind of how I got started in consulting. So I didn't start in management consulting and then go to a W-2, which a lot of people do out of business school. I actually did a lot of work in the corporate and nonprofit sector as a good employee, and kept wondering why I wanted to leave, after a few months or a few years, when the projects got boring and they stopped wanting to grow. And I realized, so what I found was many people eventually just said, hey, we could use you for a few weeks out of the year.
Mhm.
We're not sure we can handle you in our company, and so that's where I was encouraged to start my own consulting practice, which I did in 2010. It was called Change Goat because that's how I felt. Oftentimes, I felt like I was bearing the change for others, kind of a play on scapegoat. And that over the years has morphed from, let's say, typical like marketing consulting and marketing strategy, and has changed over the years to working with founders and families, so entrepreneurial families that are building like family offices, or who have gotten into starting their own funds, to co-investment strategies, to having portfolio companies, and working with entrepreneurial founders. So for me, it's working with founders and families as they want to do interesting things in the world. And so typically I would say, I get excited when someone comes to me and says, hey, yesterday's solutions, just are not working anymore. And I'm not sure what to do next. And entering into that ambiguity with them is what I do. And where it goes is anyone's guess. And that's what I enjoy. I'm really curiosity driven. And so that's basically what Change Goat is.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that background. So we were able to catch up prior to this, Lucas, and what resonated with me is, and what was kind of, riveting is when you said that CRMs is like the worst category of SaaS on the planet, and it's almost like people are allergic to them. And after we got over the fact that I work at a CRM company and we got past that together, I think we had a pretty good alignment on like why that was. Could you kind of expand on that a little bit more? Why is it the worst category in SaaS?
This is fun. I know Sarah and I both have a good take on this. So it is literally the worst. I would call it, like, I've been involved in large scale ERP transformations, and those are a death march of their own. So, but what I have found too, though, and maybe this is a little dynamic is a little different. I found most people in like finance and HR were very process oriented. They at least maybe empathize or appreciate the death march and workflows. But when you come to what brings sales and growth and marketing, which is relationship, high EQ, and communication, it is so painful to bring in and say, hey, no, let's systematize this. Let's rationalize everything you do, and let's use a tool. And so I would say, when I've thought about it, and this is kind of what I do when I've been looking at CRMs for some of the VC, private equity, and other companies, I have a little bit of background doing product development. So one, I look at it as a product developer and say, okay, what patterns, what assumptions, what workflows, what business logic are they employing here? I'm like, okay, what business book did they read? Or like, what vintage of ideas are they applying here in this software, right? Because that's what software does. It's just capturing a way of doing something. And so for me, I evaluate from that level. Does that match a client? Oftentimes they don't. I know Sarah and we've talked about, hey, if you fit in this nice, neat sales pipeline, or that doesn't really fit relationships. So those are types of things. I think another one are the operating costs. I'm looking at operating costs. Okay, what are the ongoing fees? And then you think, what's the roadmap? What's the velocity roadmap? Are we keeping up with features and functionality? Are they introducing AI and some machine learning that helps remove some of the friction? Because in the end, I think the biggest one I'm looking at is adoption cost. The last thing I want to do is actually recommend a software. This would be the worst thing for me as a consultant, recommending a software, going through all this trouble and then not using it. And how many times does that happen? Quite a bit. And so for me, I'm also having to guess which one will the client actually use? Not just will the CFO or the CIO sign off on the contract, but actually will the sales and marketing teams actually use and implement? And so to me, those are all the layers that go under why I think it's fraught with danger.
I'm going to jump in there, Lucas, because you said something that really just struck home. And it's that, I was working with a client earlier this year, and we went through the whole process of CRMs, and we chose a CRM. They chose a CRM based on, all of their own due diligence and the things that they thought that they needed. And when it came down to like the rubber meeting the road, they weren't able to implement it. And they spent an exorbitant amount of money, we'll say, to onboard themselves. And they went through the process of actually cleaning up all of their own data. And they went through the process of, organizing it in a way that, should have just been so easy to turn on and to upload. And at the end of that process, the CRM company couldn't upload the data and couldn't make the data actionable. And we went through this headache with them for 6 months to learn that everybody else in the market that had tried them had the same issue. And, they were a Cadillac of systems. They were incredibly expensive. They were very cumbersome. They touted all of these bells and whistles, but then they had this team that was dedicated to onboarding. And that team was really there charging you by the hour to help to onboard your system. And they could never get it done, but they were charging you the whole time. What I thought was so interesting about that experience and my own personal experience using Affinity was that I just called, Alex at Affinity and said, "Hey, Alex, I want to sign up." And Alex said, "Oh, great, Sarah, here's the link." And I was off and running, and I was setting up the system myself. I was able to set up my processes and my workflow. I was able to set up my clients in a way that made sense. I was able to set up the networks for those clients in a way that made sense, because my whole business is about building networks around the clients that I have of service providers, and every client has a different team. And I can build those networks out. I can build out the investor bases. I can build out everything that I need to build on a project level, and it makes it super easy. And meanwhile, my client is over here saying, "Well, we're going to go with this other company," and it was a horrible experience. And so I think that ease and that elegance of Affinity, to me, when I selected the system, it was really, how can I select something that is easy to implement, that gives me actionable ideas, that helps me manage my network, that networks me to my network. So anybody who is in my network can be, an alliance of mine in Affinity. And so I have like all of these alliances because all my friends use Affinity. And so to me, that was a real game changer in my personal selection. And in fact, that client fired the other CRM system and hired Affinity after going through that whole process.
Yeah, I'm a completely biased source, obviously, because my team does the implementations for Affinity, but that resonates. That's a common theme across a lot of our customers. They're wanting to get started quickly and get value out of a system and not have to wait months or years to do that. I want to drill into something that's more about kind of the fact that there's this theme about a relationship-based business versus being, I would say, more either transactional. And it's a common theme across our customer base where Affinity tends to resonate is where we're working with customers that work with clients that are relationship-based. And we know based on in services that it's typically a relationship-based business based on referral or growing with existing accounts over time. So I'm kind of curious, and I'll just leave it open whether whoever, Sarah or Lucas, whoever wants to jump in first, but how does the relationship-based piece of your business play in, and how does Affinity help with that?
I think it's really important. Some of my biggest referrals come from the same people. And so being able just to know this is, so-and-so, and they introduced me to my top 5 people in my Rolodex today, Affinity just pulls that out of my emails. I can see so much of who made those introductions and how those introductions came to be. And then I know who I need to keep in touch with. And so I can manage my workflow and I can manage my own personal relationships in my business based on, the amount of connectivity I have with people in my network. And so I think in that way, it's really important. I don't know, Lucas, what you've had other things to say about this on our prep call, so maybe I'll leave that to you as well.
I think as a solopreneur, as someone who I'm a team of 1 currently, that's by design. And then I have a number of delivery partners that I can work with at any time to source, specific, functional needs for a client or a project. So for me, I would say a premium is, how do I stay focused on the client? How do I keep my attention on their needs? And how do I continue to deliver on point at a high value, which means really guarding my own emotional and intellectual energy, which means the not spending any time or as little as possible on administrative tasks, on process and workflow for managing my own world. And so that actually frees me up. And so as a corollary to this, I actually have a client who, they've deployed, one of the, let's say one of the largest CRMs in the world. And what they've done is they've actually hired to work around what they know is a less than ideal software, something that's cumbersome, and it's big. They actually have hired a team so that they don't even ever have to touch it. They don't even have to look at it. And when I hear that, I think, yes, of course, because they're focusing on multi-million-dollar relationships. And they know that spending any time in a CRM or in a software is actually, for them, will kill their business over time. And so they actually hire people to do that. So I am not in that situation. So for me, it's far more important to have a CRM that actually works for me, that removes friction, that is intelligent, and is really lightweight. And so that's kind of how I think about it.
I love it when I get those pop-ups every morning that say, these are the people that you didn't respond to yesterday. And I say, oh yeah, that's right. I didn't respond to those people yesterday. Maybe I should do that first thing this morning, because emails get lost and we get busy. And my CRM is there working for me like my assistant in so many ways to manage those relationships with me. And I've never had that in any of the big CRM systems that I've ever used. I've had to figure out how to make the data actionable. And this CRM makes the data actionable for me. And I think that's a really big deal in our business, is being able to, communicate with people and have your CRM say, hey, wait a minute, you forgot this. I don't know if you get that on a daily basis, Lucas, but I certainly do.
I have been saved a few times. So I've been a customer for the last couple of months, and I've been already saved a couple of times by that feature alone. So.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I want to chat a bit more about, you both are in firms either, smaller, where you're leveraging like a delivery network. And in that situation, how does that compare and contrast with your previous experience with being in, say, a larger firm? So in terms of how you operate with those like key relationships, how you work with your clients, and then I'm going to chime in kind of with my experience from being at Accenture too. So just kind of curious from your perspective. Maybe we'll start with Lucas and then we can move to Sarah.
Sure. I've spent most of my career doing entrepreneurial consulting. So consulting in entrepreneurial environments, whether they're venture-backed companies or not, there's definitely a mandate for that. But I have also spent time in a big, I don't know, a big four, a big five consulting environment. And that's what's funny is it's the same business pattern, right? It's the same pattern of relationships, in an industry with knowledge, with functional skill sets. It's obviously far more process oriented than I was excited about. It's far more scheduled out, but at the end of the day, it's still relationships. And having access to new relationships. And I think one thing that I was reflecting on, especially with my time in one of those big four, was we would spend time figuring out how to create new business. So even though, it's, 80,000 employees, we're still a team of 6, trying to develop new lines of business, trying to go deeper with a client. And so much of it is figuring out who knows who. Right. So who on the team or who in other teams, because it's teams of teams of teams. And it's going, okay, who else, in this teams of teams of 60,000 people might know some people, or there's a unique combination of, this person, but this delivery partner, but this stakeholder, and this decision maker, and what this contract needs to say in this paragraph. in order to unlock new business. And so, when I've looked at Affinity, I thought, wow, if I actually had a huge team, I would, and actually I had this conversation recently with the delivery partners, like if I knew all the people you knew, I bet I could, come up with like 5 new business proposals over the weekend. But the fact that I don't know what's going on over there. And so that's where we talk about those alliances and, and it's one thing to, anyway, to me, like where you generate new business comes from the team, from those people you've worked with in the past and who you've, been successful with.
I think it's so spot on, Lucas, that whole idea of, whether you're in a large organization or whether you are a solopreneur, that the network that you've cultivated and developed over many years of your career, you can activate them at any point in time. And so the largest firm I've ever worked in, Brian, is 26 people. And so for me, I've always been on these small desks and these small teams. Hedge funds in general can be very small businesses, and having a background in hedge funds, working with firms that are $1 to $2 billion in assets under management, those are not large teams of people, but we rely so much on our network, and we rely so much on exactly what you said, Lucas, which was, how deep is that relationship, and does somebody else have a deeper relationship? And in using a system that tells you what the depth of that relationship is compared to those other people that are on your team, it really does help you activate the network from that perspective. And I think that it gives you a lot more clarity as to how far and how fast you can move in industry when you know exactly how it is you're going to get to the end goal. And sometimes you have to prepare, and sometimes you have to, follow a process, and sometimes you have to learn that process. But other people may already know it, and then knowing that you can rely on them just based on who they're connected to. And I think that's really important, Lucas, that you bring that up in terms of just like, even in large businesses, you can be an intrapreneur and have the same spirit as being an entrepreneur and working as a sole proprietor and a team of one, and activating the same kind of network.
Yeah, and Sarah, thanks for clarifying that broader network outside of the firms that you work with. That makes a lot of sense. And then Lucas, the thing that resonated with me is the amount of time spent where, this is a few years ago for me, but everyone getting in the same room and brainstorming about, okay, well, who knows who's connected to this other business unit, so we can get in there and talk to them about another service offering and another line of business that we can introduce into this firm. Whether you're 15 people, 100 people, or 1,000 people, the issue, the problem is still very, very similar. All right, so I'm gonna keep going down here. Sarah, I'm just kind of curious. I know that you've also kind of vetted multiple CRM platforms and things like that. Curious, different criteria that you've looked at. I know Lucas touched on this a little bit with AI and leveraging kind of technology to help take away some of the mundane tasks, but curious some of the things that you've looked at in terms of critical things that are part of those platforms and that you've assessed.
Well, I think the first thing is the user interface. And I come at this a little bit differently, and I will say that I might be an outlier in this way, and that I actually am dyslexic. And so sometimes user interfaces are not written to, or they're not designed in a way that are easy for me, because I read differently and I process information differently, and it's really difficult. And so a user interface for someone like me is extraordinarily important. And sometimes it's by accident and sometimes it's by design, but like even the color of the screen matters, right? Like even the way that the font is written on the page matters. And some of these systems just are not accessible to me because I have dyslexia. And so that actually is a core criteria for me that may be different from other people, but I still think that there is an intuitiveness that has to exist in a system for people like me to actually be able to use it. And in that, I think that it would make it easier for all, like we'll call them, control users, and that those folks would actually have a better experience too. So for me, that is a core criteria, is the user interface and how it works. The other part of that is how well I can manipulate it. I really like to get into my system and really like to build out processes and really like to build out tasks and really like to follow my workflow. And a lot of systems don't allow you to do that. And this system actually does allow me to follow a workflow and to move things along and to see my progress and, to sort of think about my business in that way. And I think that, it really does keep me on task at the end of the day. People, some companies want the system that integrates really well with mailings and integrates really well with social media and integrates really well with all of those things. And I know that you all do as well, but for me, that's not as important as being able just to follow my daily workflow and figure out who it is I need to actually activate on a day, on any given day, around my workflow. So those are a couple of the criteria that I choose, but it really all kind of comes back to that, user interface and being able to figure out what is actionable. And it's critical for me that I can actually use it.
Anything else you'd add, Lucas?
Like obviously in consumer, consumer apps, there's the design patterns with that have been great in the last decade, with mobile design, like pressing down and hiding a lot of the complexity in apps and products, and especially in SaaS. But it's interesting, like in the CRM, and there's obviously lightweight CRMs out there, or like they feel lightweight. And those are helpful, I would say. And an interesting dynamic in the VCPE and maybe I would say like the smart people consulting space, there's a proclivity to want complexity. Meaning if the more complex and the more expensive it is, that's the one we need to get. I don't know if it's because of CFOs and attorneys, like there's a culture, right, around, and consultants too, right? Everyone likes to think they're really smart. So we should, obviously get the more complex product. Sarah provided a great example, a counterexample to why that's like a terrible idea. But for me, I think most of the clients I know, they're like who are purchasing the software. Sometimes you get this, it's the CFO or some IT, outsourced IT, and so it's an engineer. But in these small teams, I work with the decision makers, and none of them want to spend time in an app. And so for me, something that actually feels like an app that they would use voluntarily, goes a long way. And then, so for me, I think that's one thing I noticed about Affinity that just isn't many other places. Whereas, I think the challenge is for some of my clients is when they start saying, well, what about our database of record? And I'll be like, well, how much does that database of record matter for raising your next, round or your next fund? And do you want to be doing that? And you start getting into this, and so for me, there's this interesting give and take depending on who the decision maker is. And I've always tried to, I tend to work out with the CEO, and then obviously with the CFO in these cases, but the CEO never wants the big, bulky, nasty like CRM.
So switching gears again, I did want to dive a little bit deeper into this concept of a delivery network. So essentially extended networks. And I am curious how each one of you leverage those networks, and then how does Affinity play into that? So Lucas, do you want to dive in first?
And I think from listening to Sarah, I think her processes are far more mature. So I can at least speak to my hope. And then I think Sarah could probably just kill it. So, but yeah, briefly, so for me, I work with delivery partners intentionally. So I'm not solo for just my own reason. I'm solo intentionally because like Sarah mentioned, most of these firms are quite small, and they'd far prefer to work with an individual that they trust. And so, but then I can work across a number of things that requires, having partners that have deep skill sets and functional skill sets in areas that I have no expertise and should, avoid it all. So, but in that network, I've actually just put all of them into Affinity. I've created a list. What's nice about that, now I'm learning more about them and how I interact with them. And so for me, being somewhat immature in my internal processes around them, obviously I joke with people, it's like if you have a realtor, you just go, oh, I know a guy, right? You're like, oh, that's broken. I know a guy, right? A lot of times it can be kind of like that. But I'm looking forward to building a more robust process around how I actually can keep in touch with delivery partners, stay engaged with them, develop more ideas around business development. And frankly, in the past, it has been when a problem comes up or a demand from a client comes up, I go access the network. But then I'm like, okay, where are they? Who was that? Oh, there's this engagement 5 years ago, and it's really inefficient. And so I've already surfaced a number of people. And I was like, wow, I actually know a lot of people in a lot of different categories. And so I look forward to, providing better service to the clients as well.
Lucas, we used to do that on LinkedIn a lot more because that was sort of where we would go to tap our network, right? And in our prep call, we talked a lot about like the idea that you could actually let go of LinkedIn for the first time because you know who's in your network and you know how they're connected, and cutting the cord, so to speak, was a really interesting concept. So I started thinking about that for myself. So I was interested to hear your comment about that. And I built a methodology for my business, and then I just run that methodology through my delivery partners in each of those areas. And so once I knew what the methodology was behind every stage of working with a client that I have, then I was able to assign people in my network to that stage of methodology. And so there may be 50 lawyers that are, fund management lawyers, and there may be 2 that are IP lawyers. And I need to be able to tell which ones are IP and which ones are fund management lawyers. And I can just assign them, a hashtag essentially, but I can just assign them to a category. And when I need them, they're assigned to that category for me. And so every step and every part of the methodology of my business, all 16 steps, that I go through with clients in an engagement I have dedicated teams in each of those steps that can help me, sort of build a more robust delivery process for the client. And so when the client hires me, they understand at that point that they're hiring a team of people, and that team is selected and handpicked by me based on a set of criteria that starts really with how successful they've been in their own careers and in their own path. And so I try really hard to just be able to tap into the network appropriately. And then some of those folks will have, specialties. So I actually specialize in industrials and green energy. And I have another specialty in cybersecurity and technology. And then I also do a lot of healthcare technology. So I have these like 3 areas that I really focus on. And then I have people who are in my network that are dedicated to each of those areas. So anytime I'm hung up or anytime I have a question about, who I need to call in my network, I can just click on it and say, I need somebody in green energy that does this. And I can find them really quickly because I've set it up that way. And so those deliverables for me are extraordinarily important. And they really do help me like not lose track of my day while I'm trying to figure out who in my network to tap when I need to tap them, because that eats up our time.
Yeah, I mean, that both of your points are just really resonate with me across our customer base. So whether you're in venture capital and services, providing real estate services, or investment banking, like that same concept. Obviously, there's different filters, different focus areas, but it's really, really common across the customer base. And we're just hearing a lot of great feedback about the ability to do that. So that's exciting. I'm just doing a quick time check. It looks like we're coming right up on time. So I just want to say thank you, Sarah and Lucas, for your time. I really appreciate the conversation today and hearing about how you all are, conquering this consulting world and also leveraging Affinity with that. And I guess for the audience, if you have any questions, please reach out directly to webinars@affinity.co. We are happy to answer those offline. And thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to see both of you today. Thank you to Affinity. It's a great product. Congratulations.
Yeah, and Brian, thank you for having us. And I actually, what Sarah just mentioned, I was like, I'm excited to see some of her templates show up in the system, because every time I hear about a consultant solving a new problem, it's like, I would love to see that template in Affinity. So
I'll email it to you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.